I've been carrying this with me for over 15 years, and I've never shared it online before, but I need to get this off my chest. And maybe someone out there has experienced something similar. When I was 12, my family moved from Queens to Marietta, Georgia. It wasn't a planned move. We had to leave quickly after my dad got hurt. He worked construction in New York, and there was this accident where a steel beam came loose. It hit him in the head, and he was never the same after. The doctors called it a traumatic brain injury. His personality changed. He'd get angry over nothing, sometimes couldn't remember simple things, and other times he'd just stare off into space. We moved because my mom's sister lived in Marietta and said she could help us out. Plus, the cost of living was way cheaper than New York. But we didn't have much money, so we ended up in this tiny apartment near Franklin Road. It only had one bedroom, which my parents took, while I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. It wasn't ideal, but I tried to make the best of it. The worst part was that my dad would stay up late watching TV in the living room. He couldn't sleep well after his accident. So most nights I'd try to fall asleep with the TV blaring some old Western or war movie. My dad always kept the volume way too loud. Another side effect of his injury was hearing problems. This particular night in October, I was exhausted from school. I'd had a math test, then PE where we ran the mile, and I'd stayed after school trying to make some friends by playing basketball. By 9 o'clock I was completely wiped out, but my dad was settled in for a John Wayne marathon with the volume cranked up. "Dad, can you turn it down a little?" I asked. He just stared at the screen, either ignoring me or genuinely not hearing me. That happened a lot since the accident. I grabbed my pillow and blanket. "I'm gonna lie down in your room for a bit, okay?" He nodded without looking away from the TV. At least I think he nodded. Sometimes it was hard to tell if he was actually responding or just moving his head randomly. I dragged myself to my parents' bedroom. Mom was working the late shift at Waffle House, so the room was empty. I didn't bother turning on the light. The hallway light gave enough of a glow for me to find the bed. I flopped down on top of the covers, not planning to fall asleep there, just wanting some quiet for a little while. Their bedroom was small, just a queen bed, a dresser, and a walk-in closet. The closet was directly across from the foot of the bed, maybe 15 feet away, with the door always left open. As I lay there, I could see into the darkness of the closet. Something about it caught my attention. The room was dark, but the closet seemed darker, like a deeper shade of black. I remember checking the time on my parents' alarm clock, 9:23. I was just starting to relax when I noticed something weird about that darkness in the closet. Part of it seemed to be moving. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. You know how when you stare into darkness long enough, you start seeing things move. But this was different. There was a shape within the darkness that was darker than the rest. A silhouette. I sat up, squinting to get a better look. That's when I could make it out clearly. It was shaped like a person. A tall person with broad shoulders, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned coat that went down past the knees, and a wide-brimmed hat like gangsters wore in those old black-and-white movies. But there was no face, just blackness where the face should be. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but this wasn't a normal person. The way it moved was all wrong. It didn't step or walk like a human. Instead, it sort of shifted from side to side, then forward and back, in these jerky, jumping motions, like watching a film where frames are missing. And when I looked down, this is the part that still makes my skin crawl. It had no feet. The bottom of the coat just ended in darkness, hovering maybe an inch above the carpet. I couldn't move. I literally couldn't make my body respond. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, drowning out even the sound of my dad's TV from the living room. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. The figure kept doing that weird shifting movement, like it was pacing, but without actually walking. It never left the closet, just moved within that space. And even though it had no face, I somehow knew it was watching me. I could feel it looking at me, Minutes passed like this, me frozen in terror, the shadow man moving in its strange, broken way. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that it was just clothes hanging in the closet and my imagination was getting the best of me, but then it moved again, this time shifting closer to the closet door, and I knew with absolute certainty this was no trick of the light. That's when I found my ability to move again. I bolted upright, then scrambled backward until my back hit the headboard. The shadow man stopped moving when I did, as if it was reacting to me. We stayed like that in some kind of standoff for what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds. Then it started moving toward the closet door. That was it. I couldn't take any more. I launched myself off the bed and ran for the bedroom door. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was standing in the living room, gasping for breath. My dad was still in his recliner, the blue light from the TV flickering across his face. I wanted to tell him, to explain what I'd just seen, but I hesitated. Since his accident, my dad's reactions were unpredictable. Sometimes he'd get really angry about small things, or he'd get confused and upset. The last thing I wanted was to trigger one of his episodes, so I just stood there, trying to catch my breath, wondering what to do. That's when my dad slowly turned his head from the TV to look at me. His expression was strange, not confused or angry, but serious and knowing. "I know," he said, his voice unusually clear. "I see it too." My blood turned to ice. I hadn't said a word about what I'd seen. How could he know? "What?" I managed to ask. "The shadow man," my dad said, still in that eerily calm voice. "In the coat and hat, he watches us." I felt like I was going to pass out. My dad had seen it too, not just now, but he was talking like he'd seen it before. "When?" I whispered. "When did you see it?" "First time was at the construction site in New York," he said, his eyes now distant. 2 weeks before the accident. He was standing on the scaffolding. Nobody else saw him. I thought I was just tired. A chill ran through me as I realized what he was saying. The shadow man had appeared to my dad before the accident that changed our lives. "He follows us," my dad continued. "I see him sometimes, standing in corners, watching, but he never does anything. Just watches." I couldn't process this. My dad had been seeing this thing for months and never said anything. Then again, with his injury, maybe he thought it wasn't real, or maybe he'd tried to tell someone and they dismissed it as another symptom of his brain damage. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. My dad shrugged. "Don't know. But he's not friendly. Not evil either, I don't think. Just watching." I spent the rest of the night on the couch next to my dad's recliner, neither of us sleeping. We didn't talk much more about it, but there was this understanding between us. When Mum came home around 4 in the morning, we were both still awake, staring at the TV without really seeing it. The next day, I overheard my mum talking to her sister on the phone. She was worried about Dad and me, saying we both looked like we'd seen a ghost. That's when my aunt said something that stuck with me. She said there was darkness in our family, going back generations. She talked about how our great-grandfather had been involved in some bad things in the old country, and how maybe that darkness was still following us. "Some people call it a generational curse," my aunt said. "The sins of the father visiting the children. I don't know if I believe in curses, but I do know what I saw that night. And I know my dad saw it too, which means it wasn't just my imagination. We lived in that apartment for 2 more years, and I saw the shadow man 3 more times, always in dark corners, always watching, never approaching. The last time I saw him was the night before we moved out. He was standing in my parents' closet again, but this time he didn't move at all, just stood there, like he was saying goodbye. We never talked about it much, my dad and I. It was this unspoken thing between us. Sometimes he'd look at a dark corner of a room a little too long, and I'd know he was seeing it again. I'd ask, "Is he there?" And Dad would just nod slightly. Mom never saw it, or if she did, she never let on. I think she had enough to worry about with Dad's condition and trying to keep us afloat financially. When my dad passed away 5 years ago from complications related to his injury, I went back to the apartment building in Marietta. It had been renovated, turned into condos. I stood outside, looking up at where our unit had been, and for a split second, I thought I saw a dark silhouette in the window. But when I blinked, it was gone. I still don't know what the shadow man was. Was it some kind of warning about my dad's accident? Was it, as my aunt suggested, some kind of family curse? Or was it something else entirely? All I know for sure is that both my father and I saw it at the same time that night, which means it wasn't just in our heads. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I still catch myself looking at the dark corners of my room, half expecting to see that featureless silhouette in its gangster coat and hat, shifting left and right in that unnatural way. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I do. Story 17. I never believed in ghosts. That was always my husband Mark's department, watching those ridiculous paranormal shows and getting spooked by every little creak in our old house. I'd roll my eyes and remind him about our aging pipes and settling foundation. But what happened last November has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about reality. We've lived in our little colonial-style home just outside Seattle for almost 7 years now. It's nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a decent yard for our lab mix, Charlie, and a long pebble driveway that winds through the pines before reaching our house. It's quiet here, which is exactly what we wanted when we moved from the city after Ethan was born. He's 13 now, spends most of his time playing video games or skateboarding with the neighbor kids. November in Washington means darkness by 5 o'clock, and that evening was particularly gloomy. Mark was working late, so it was just Ethan and me for dinner. I was in the kitchen making pasta, nothing special, just some sauce from a jar with ground beef thrown in. The kitchen has this big window above the sink that looks out onto the side yard and part of our driveway. I've always loved that window, the way the afternoon light filters through the trees, how I can watch the seasons change while doing dishes. I was stirring the sauce when I first saw it. Just a glimpse of movement outside in my peripheral vision. I looked up, expecting to see Charlie chasing a squirrel, or maybe a deer. They wander through our yard sometimes. But instead, there was a figure. That's the only way I can describe it. A dark, person-shaped silhouette standing at the edge of our driveway, maybe 40 feet from the house. I blinked and it was gone. I brushed it off. Probably just a trick of the light or my eyes adjusting to the darkness outside, but something felt off. Charlie hadn't barked, and he always barks at everything. Delivery people, neighbors, falling leaves, you name it. He was actually napping in the living room, completely unbothered. I went back to cooking, but kept glancing out the window every few seconds. Nothing. Just our dark yard and the pebbled driveway illuminated by our porch light. Then I saw it again, closer this time. It was definitely shaped like a person, but something was wrong about it. The proportion seemed slightly off, and it moved strangely, like it was gliding rather than walking. And here's the thing, our driveway is covered in those small decorative pebbles. You can't walk on it without making that distinctive crunching sound. Mark jokes that it's better than a security system because you can hear someone coming from a mile away, but there was no sound. Nothing. I dropped the spoon I was holding and moved closer to the window, pressing my face against the glass to get a better look. Again, nothing was there. Just darkness. "You're losing it, Sarah," I muttered to myself, returning to the stove. The sauce was starting to bubble, and I turned down the heat. My hands were shaking a little, and I felt foolish. It was probably just a neighbor walking their dog on the street beyond our property. That had to be it. But then why hadn't Charlie reacted, and why no sound from the driveway? I tried to focus on cooking, but kept glancing out the window every few seconds. The third time I saw it, my blood went cold. It was much closer now, maybe 15 feet from the house, and I could make out more details. It was tall, taller than Mark, who's 6 feet, and thin, unnaturally thin. And though I couldn't make out a face in the darkness, I had the distinct impression it was looking directly at me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there frozen with my hands gripping the edge of the sink. Then, like before, it simply wasn't there anymore. Not like it walked away or faded. It was just gone between one blink and the next. I backed away from the window, bumping into the island behind me. My heart was racing and I felt lightheaded. I grabbed my phone, thinking I should call Mark, but what would I even say? That I was seeing shadow people in our yard. He'd just worry and rush home for nothing. It was probably just my mind playing tricks on me. I checked on Charlie, still asleep on the couch, completely relaxed. Surely if there was someone outside, he would be going crazy. We installed a motion-activated security camera facing the driveway last year after someone stole packages from a few houses in the neighborhood. I pulled up the app on my phone, but there were no recent alerts. Nothing had triggered the camera. Get a grip, I told myself, taking a deep breath. I went back to the kitchen, deliberately keeping my back to the window as I drained the pasta. The rational part of my brain was trying to come up with explanations. Maybe it was just shadows from the trees moving in the wind, or headlights from a car on the road beyond our property, but it had looked so solid, so intentional. I called Ethan down for dinner, trying to keep my voice steady. I heard his footsteps overhead, then down the stairs. I was setting plates on the table when he walked into the kitchen. "Hey, Mom, did you—" He stopped mid-sentence, his eyes going wide as he looked past me toward the window. He took a step back, his face draining of color. "Ethan." I turned to follow his gaze, but there was nothing there, just the dark window and our reflection in the glass. "There was someone right there," he said, pointing at the window, "right outside, looking in." My stomach dropped. "What did you see exactly?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "A person, really tall, standing right at the window." His voice had a slight tremor. "They were just staring in, but then they were gone." I felt sick. If Ethan had seen it too, then I wasn't imagining things. This was real. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked. And suddenly he looked much younger than 13, scared in a way I hadn't seen since he was little. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've been seeing something outside too. But the security camera hasn't picked up anything, and Charlie hasn't reacted at all." As if on cue, Charlie finally wandered into the kitchen, yawning and wagging his tail like everything was perfectly normal. He went to his water bowl, took a drink, then looked up at us expectantly, hoping for dinner scraps. "This is so messed up," Ethan said, pulling out his phone. "I'm going to take a video if it comes back." We stood there for several minutes, both staring out the window, phones ready, but nothing appeared. The longer we waited, the more I started to doubt what we'd seen. Maybe it had been a reflection or a trick of the light that somehow we both misinterpreted. "Let's eat," I finally said. "The food's getting cold." We sat down, but neither of us had much appetite. I kept looking over my shoulder at the window, and Ethan was unusually quiet. I tried to start a conversation about school, about his upcoming science project, anything to distract us, but it felt forced. "You really saw something too, right?" he asked suddenly, pushing his pasta around his plate. "Yes," I said after a moment. 3 times, and it kept getting closer to the house." "Did it look normal, like a regular person?" I hesitated. "Not exactly. Something seemed off about it. The way it moved wasn't quite right." Ethan nodded slowly. "I couldn't see a face. It was like a shadow, but not a shadow. I don't know how to explain it." We fell silent again. Outside, the wind had picked up, making the branches scrape against the side of the house. Normally that sound wouldn't bother me, but now every little noise had me on edge. "Should we call Dad?" Ethan asked. "Let's not worry him yet," I said, though I was tempted. "He'll be home in an hour anyway." After dinner, we moved to the living room, as far from the kitchen window as possible. I turned on every light in the house and closed all the blinds. We sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV while actually jumping at every sound. Charlie had gone back to sleep, completely unconcerned. "Maybe we should check the security footage again," Ethan suggested. "Even if it didn't send an alert, there might be something." I nodded and pulled up the app. We scrolled through the recorded clips, but there was nothing unusual. Just a few instances of Charlie in the yard earlier that day, and the mail carrier delivering a package around noon. Nothing during the times when we'd seen the figure. "This doesn't make any sense," I said, frustration mixing with fear. "How could we both see something that the camera didn't pick up?" "Maybe it wasn't really there," Ethan said softly. "Like maybe it was a ghost or something." I wanted to dismiss that idea immediately, to tell him there's no such thing as ghosts, that there had to be a logical explanation. But I couldn't. Not after what we'd both seen. "I don't know what it was," I admitted. We sat in silence for a while, the TV playing in the background, but neither of us really watching. Then Ethan suddenly sat up straight, his eyes fixed on something behind me. "Mom," he whispered, "it's at the front window now." I froze, afraid to turn around. The living room window faced the front porch, a completely different side of the house from the kitchen. "Are you sure?" My voice was barely audible. He nodded, his face pale. "It's just standing there, watching." Slowly I turned to look. Through a gap in the blinds I could see it. A dark silhouette standing on our porch, impossibly tall and thin, pressed against the window. It wasn't moving, just standing there, and though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew it was looking directly at us. Charlie was still asleep on the floor. The motion lights on the porch hadn't activated. Nothing about this made sense. "Don't look at it," I said, turning back to Ethan. "Just don't look." But it was too late. He was staring at it, transfixed. Then, without warning, he stood up. "Ethan!" I grabbed his arm, but he seemed to be in some kind of trance, his eyes unfocused. "Ethan, sit down!" He pulled away from me and started walking toward the window. I jumped up and grabbed him, physically pulling him back to the couch. "What are you doing?" I demanded, terrified. He blinked several times, looking confused. I thought it was calling me." "What do you mean, calling you? Did you hear something?" "Not hear exactly, just knew. Like it wanted me to come outside." I looked back at the window and the figure was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived, because now I was certain of one thing. Whatever this was, it wasn't harmless. It had tried to lure my son outside. I grabbed my phone and called Mark, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. "Hey, are you on your way home?" I asked when he answered, trying to sound normal. "Just leaving now. Everything okay?" "Yeah, just... Can you hurry? We miss you." I didn't want to explain over the phone. It sounded too crazy. "Sure, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes were the longest of my life. Ethan and I stayed on the couch, huddled together, not looking at any of the windows. Charlie finally woke up and seemed to sense our distress, pressing himself against our legs. Still, he showed no sign of sensing anything unusual outside. When we finally heard Mark's car on the driveway, that familiar crunch of tires on pebbles, I nearly cried with relief. We met him at the door, and I'm sure we looked like a mess, both pale and visibly shaken. "What's going on?" he asked immediately, looking concerned. I tried to explain what had happened, how both Ethan and I had seen this figure, how it had somehow influenced Ethan to try to go outside. Mark listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious by the minute. "And the security camera didn't pick up anything?" he asked when I finished. "Nothing," I confirmed. "And Charlie didn't react at all?" Mark checked all the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. He went outside with a flashlight, checking around the house, while Ethan and I watched anxiously from inside. He found nothing. No footprints. No evidence that anyone had been there. We didn't see the figure again that night or in the days that followed. Mark suggested it might have been someone playing a prank, or maybe just shadows from passing cars combined with our imaginations. But that doesn't explain how Ethan and I saw the same thing, or why he felt compelled to go to it. It's been 6 months now, and nothing like that has happened since. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was all in our heads, some kind of shared hallucination. But then I'll catch Ethan staring out the window with a distant look in his eyes. Or I'll feel a sudden chill when I'm alone in the kitchen, and I know it was real. We never found an explanation. The security camera never captured anything unusual. Charlie never sensed anything wrong. We've talked about moving, but this is our home, and whatever it was hasn't returned. But sometimes, when I'm washing dishes at night, I can't help but glance up at that kitchen window, half expecting to see that tall, thin figure staring back at me. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for another chance to call us outside.